With us tonight are doctors Katie Reynolds and Peter Reynolds, and they are going to be sharing their expertise with us about youth development, healthy mental health around technology, and give you some information and some strategies that you can use with the children in your life. Dr. Katie Reynolds is an accomplished educator and leader with expertise in instructional design, technology integration, and leadership development. She holds a PhD in educational leadership from the University of Dayton and has over 15 years of experience in K-12 education, higher education, and the nonprofit sector. A passionate advocate for safe and effective technology use, Dr. Reynolds works with schools and communities to address the intersection of technology and mental health, especially among teens. Dr. Reynolds currently serves as the Director of Program Development and Operations at the University of Dayton's School of Education and Health Sciences, where she oversees graduate, doctoral, certificate, and license programs. Dr. Peter Reynolds, MD, is an associate professor and the Family Medicine Residency Program Director at the Boonshoft School of Medicine. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians and the AFMRD National Institute for Program Director Development. Most recently, he completed his MBA at Wright State University. Dr. Reynolds' residency program was recently awarded a $2.3 million federal award to provide additional training to medical students and residents on the mental health and behavioral health needs of children. The training focus tonight is going to be on mental health and behavioral health problems, and that's his program, including substance use disorders, suicide prevention, trauma-informed care, and the effects of abuse and gun violence on young people. I'd like to ask you to please welcome Doctors Katie and Peter Reynolds this evening so that they can begin their presentation. There will be a portion at the end where you can ask questions. You'll find the Q&A tab if you select more. It might look like a little circle with 3 dots in it. Select more where you will find the Q&A option. Actually, it might also just be on your bottom toolbar. Depends on how what update you have for Zoom, but you can find that Q&A where you can ask questions. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Reynolds.
Hey, everybody. I'm Pete Reynolds, and the other Dr. Reynolds is Katie Reynolds, my wife, and she's a real expert here. I'm going to start us off, though, with a kind of a scenario to get us in the right mindset, I think. And just a disclaimer that what we're going to say is based on experience and research, but does not represent the opinions of University of Dayton, Wright State University, or any of the other affiliated institutions we have. And the other thing is this is for informational purposes. There are certainly aspects of what we're going to talk about where you do need to have professional help for your kids or yourself. Hopefully that isn't a problem for any of you on this call, but it's possible. So this is the agenda for tonight. Talk about mental health concerns related to social media, high-risk trends, legal issues, and responsible use. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So to kind of start out, I just want to give you the perspective that I have about social media and how concerns with the effect of this on teens has evolved in my career. And to kind of explain that, I just would like to give you a feeling for a common scenario so that I experienced in my office. I've been a family medicine doctor for over 20 years, and I love young adults, adolescents and young adults quite a lot, and enjoy that part of my practice. And so not uncommonly, a young person will come in to see me with a mental health concern. Maybe their parent brought them in, or maybe they brought it up unsolicited during a wellness visit, such as a sports physical. And when this happens, there's kind of been historically 3 concerns I have. So this is someone who's feeling emotions they don't understand, struggling in school, or that kind of thing. And typically in this scenario, I'll give you a specific scenario for discussion. So imagine everything I'm going to say is based on real patients, but I'm going to change it up a little bit just for patient privacy. But in this scenario, the person who comes into my office is a 14-year-old male who's done well in school until the last year and is starting to have failing grades. And the teacher suggested the parent, a single parent, mother, brought the child in to get checked because perhaps the child has attention deficit disorder, and which may well be. But I always kind of consider what other things could be going on leading to this change in school performance. And so typically, when I see anything like this, these are the three top concerns I've had historically during my career. Number one, is this a mental health condition that puts them at a risk of harm to themselves? So, for example, severe depression with suicidal thoughts. Number two, could this be a situation where they're experiencing domestic violence or bullying and they're at risk of harm from others? And certainly in the adolescent, young adult age groups, this can manifest as an acute change in performance in school. And then the third typical concern I'd see is there a substance abuse problem? Is this child experimenting with drugs and alcohol and having a change in performance in school? Well, things have changed, which we're going to get into, but let's talk about why I care so much about this. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, are just a term that describes any kind of adverse experience in childhood. And there's been a lot of research in these areas, and they include all the three things I mentioned. And the problem is that the toxic stress on the body from ACEs can change brain development and affect how the body responds to stress and ultimately the life success of that person far into their adulthood. And so next slide. And the great thing about if you can intervene in these kind of things as a physician or other, as a teacher, as a parent, really, the impact can be tremendous far into their life, including mental health concerns, other medical concerns, decreased risk of risk behavior later, including substance abuse, and even better success in jobs and higher potential in the job market. And so again, when I see a child with this kind of complaint, I want to screen for these three things, and I want to intervene if at all possible because of the long-term impact. And certainly, as much as possible, I try to intervene with the cooperation and the leadership, really, of the parent. So next slide. This is just a slide. A lot of my statistics are from the CDC, but just to give you an idea how big the impact is, this is the impact of addressing adverse childhood experiences and events, reducing the risk of, you can see there, depressive disorder in the top left, all the way down to diabetes, but also reducing health risk behaviors and finally reducing unemployment and improving success in jobs. Okay, next slide. So these three concerns I've talked about, number one would be, is the person suicidal? And it's unfortunately very common in the U.S. About 2 million adolescents attempt to kill themselves in the U.S. every year. And of course, this is a small fraction of those folks who are struggling with feelings of suicidal ideation, just being in so much pain from their mental health concerns. To put that in perspective, that's twice the population of the greater Dayton area where we live. It's about 3 times the number of homeless people in the entire country. So 2 million adolescents trying to kill themselves every year is terrible. And this is the second leading cause of death for children in this age group, second after like car accidents like that. Next slide, please. Domestic violence and abuse, of course, a terrible situation with many girls and boys experiencing that. These are, 1 in 4 girls experience domestic violence at home, 1 in 13 boys. Bullying, huge problem. 1 in 5, as of 2019, 1 in 5 students experiencing bullying. So these are the things on my radar when I saw those changes. Substance abuse is the third thing I already mentioned, and substance abuse is a neuropsychological disorder where not only do you become dependent on a substance, but there's this bad feedback loop where you have an increasing urge to pursue the substance, but then it's less satisfying. And here's the rates of this just in the U.S. in 2023, some more CDC stats. So, big problems. So these are unfortunate, common problems that I think about. So here's how we'll circle back to social media. Next slide, please. This is some data from substance abuse treatment centers just over the last 5 years. And what you see here is 2019, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, we get it. 2024, there are centers that kind of have been surveyed. What's the most common type of addiction that your folks have? And then you see in 2024 now, in recent, where things are starting to show up like internet and social media. And so fast forward to my case I'm talking about. So this student I saw, go ahead. There you go. So what about my patient? 14-year-old male, sudden change in school performance. And without getting into too many diagnostic details, it wasn't violence at home, it wasn't bullying at school, and it wasn't substance abuse. This came back after a careful analysis that this was actually an addiction to video games. So this young man had got sucked into video games, and it had got to that point where the brain changes are starting to happen, where there was this neuropsychiatric disorder where the cravings for video games started to outweigh the desire for success in school or even relationships. And it manifests itself as almost like an attention disorder or depression, but it was really related to this game activity. So, wow, that got my attention because this is a paradigm shift. And now I add that, and I've started to have other patients with video game addiction, social media addiction, and some of the things Katie's going to talk about. So, to start the discussion, I just wanted to give you that example of how serious I think this is. And I was a naive parent in the sense that I would have been much more concerned if I found my child, you know, drunk on alcohol, say 14, 15 years old. I'd be very concerned about that compared to if I saw them on their phone too often. But things are really changing where this is not just it's just a huge issue. It's not just a minor concern; it's a major concern. I saw from the surveys that you all did in the waiting room. Some of you see this as a major concern. Some of you, and I applaud you who realize that. But I'm learning this firsthand in the office. So that said, I'm going to hand it off to Katie now, the other Dr. Reynolds, who's the real expert on the social media world, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy what she says. I'll be back in a little bit towards the end where I'm going to talk about peer pressure refusal skills. So what's one way that you can cope with this? And it's going to fit in nicely, I think, with what Katie's going to share. So thanks for being here. Thanks for your attention. Katie, I'll hand it off to you.
Let me get started on our next section of our work. So I have a few questions I just want to share with you to get your mind into the thought process of what we're going to talk about. Some questions that you can actually use with your own children when you have conversations with them to kind of get their mind in the mindset of let's talk about technology use and how it's beneficial or harmful. So here's one question. When was the last time technology actually helped you connect more deeply with someone in real life? So that's a tough question because I think a lot of the excuses for using social media might be I get to connect with my friends and have a better, really deep relationship. But that's a good question to ask. How does it really help in real life? So that's one question you ask. And when has it created distance instead? So has social media ever come into play where it actually caused a conflict or problem? Good questions to ask your kids. Another one is what's one technology habit you've noticed that affects your mood or well-being? Maybe sometimes you're looking at social media where it really impacts you negatively, gets you angry, and you're really upset, and then you're starting to distance yourself from family members or other friends that might have different types of views from you, and it causes a disconnect. And we call them the disappeared ones, the ones who've disappeared from your life. So, has that happened? And how might you adjust it to create a healthier relationship with your devices? So, those are just questions to really think about in your brain as we go through some of this for yourself and also thinking about your own children and how you can have conversations with them. So some of the deep things we're going to talk about with tonight, and we can't cover everything, of course, this one session. There's a lot of depth that we can go into each of these topics. So we're going to try to cover the main concerns that you might have with this, and then how to approach that and equip yourself to help your children to deal with these consequences and problems, and also the positives, and then hopefully give you resources to go a little deeper to find a better way to manage your life and your children's life on social media and also on just media device use. So, of course, starting with mental health, about how excessive media use does increase depression, anxiety, and loneliness, how it can cause to sleep disturbances, it can impact physical health, and also social development. And if anytime, so if you do notice, I'd like to share, so there should be a Q&A at the bottom. If you're looking at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A. If you don't see Q&A with this little box of the question, you can click the three dots that say more and then open up the Q&A. Feel free to be doing that as we talk, to open up that Q&A, to have questions. We'll definitely, hopefully you're seeing that. I keep clicking off of that. We'll address some of those things as we get toward the end of our session. Um, so let's talk a little bit about brain development. So brain development is an important part of social media use, just because the brain is developing in this critical age where your children might be starting to use social media. And so there are ways that it's growing and creating these neural pathways that are forever. And we want to be sure that those pathways that are created are positive pathways. So it's important to know that the brain is actually 90% developed, like adult size, by age 5. And so once the size is developed, but all this wiring is happening, and really up until about approximately age 25 is when that frontal cortex is the last part to really develop, and that's where they make wise decisions. So even up to 25, it's a little difficult for them to maybe take all their information and make wise decisions. So it's important to remember that. But most importantly, between those critical ages 9 to 15 is where a lot of this neural pathway development is happening. So other things that are happening are, here we go. So some things called pruning, so eliminating unnecessary connections, so things that maybe pathways they're not using a lot. They're getting myelination that helps for faster communication. Those nerves are getting like coated in a nice little fatty layer that helps the signals to go faster. And those that are used more often are more likely to survive that pruning process. So if you think about it, as your teenagers start to use social media or your phones, and that's like their main focus during this main development time, those are the neural pathways getting developed, which may not be the positive pathways that you want to be developed. So let's look at thinking about what it used to be like when you were possibly a child, and when your parents let you go out and play by yourself without major supervision, or having to hide you in your house. So it used to be that a lot of people were allowed to go out into their neighborhoods and play with their neighbors and their friends and meet up and take walks or ride their bikes to the school. And that's really reduced over the past approximately 15 years. And those are important experiences you have. If you think about playing on the playground, playing before school or after school or on the weekends with your neighbors, you kind of learn this maybe negotiation skills. Let's make up a game. Now let's make up the rules. And oh, now you broke those rules. And so how can we deal with you breaking those rules? So those are important social skills that translate to adult life. And you want them to learn that. But the more that they're now inside, not with those friends and not getting those experiences, those types of growth in neural pathways are getting neglected. And we want to make sure we include those times of play or the play lifestyle so that they can develop those pathways. So I wanted to present to you a kind of a phenomenon. You can read about this a little bit more in a book called The Anxious Generation. I really recommend it because it does go in extreme depth on research about how things have changed over the past 15 to 20 years. So if you think of like pre-2009, early, pre-1990s, there really was a place in our childhood that children did play outside and were allowed to go to neighbor's house. And then going into the 1990s, there was an increased concern over children being safety. So that kind of coincided with the concern over predatory behavior of some people, maybe some pedophiles or others with kidnappings and things like that. And so parents started to bring their children inside more and had them protected and didn't allow them to necessarily go at will around the neighborhood. So that kind of created this atmosphere where they were more isolated and are not getting that interaction and social skills. And then that really, really took a turn in the 2010 range. And that's with the iPhone explosion. So when the iPhones first came out about 2007, they were kind of phones, messaging and stuff. By 2010, that's when we really got an internet connection and started to have more applications where people were then having their social interactions on the phone. And then, as we've seen in the past years since that time, an increased amount of social media, future generations really were undergoing that whole puberty phase where their brain is developing on social media and screens. So that is has a huge impact on how they developed. So you can think of this as an isolation phase where students or your children, I call them students because I think of that as my teacher and principal background. They're more isolated and not having those social interactions, and that can have a profound impact on their anxiety and depression levels. So reality, since 2010, we've seen that teens spend about 65% less time with their friends each day than they did back in 2010. So that's a massive change and decrease. So they might say, you might hear kids say that, oh, well, I have my social media, and we're talking all the time. So they're equating this amount of quantity interactions with their friends as a positive, but really what that is a little bit less quality than what they would have had if they were spending that time face to face. And they're spending less time with their family and community, which is another area of social development. And they're also looking online to say, what's the current trend? And then modeling their own behavior, attitudes, and beliefs based on that trend, which, as you know, comes and goes within a week instead of being really a solid moral grounding for what they should do. And so they are kind of mixed up of who they are and where they can develop. They're following other people instead of finding their own pathway. So if you think of it too, that interaction, the social interaction, even from an early age, the face to face with mom, being able to see the smile and respond to it, having the words ask questions and they can babble back, has somewhat changed even with parents using phones as a distraction for themselves or for the children. And so they're not getting that face to face as much. So it's really important to be aware of that really from early on. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on how it impacts in early toddlerhood because I think most people here aren't here with the toddler age. But it is important to know that early childhood use before 2 and before 4 has a massive impact, and we're learning more and more and more about that as we get more into the age of having our children having had this social media and internet and uh, phone and computer use in the past 10 to 15 years. But it is starting to be very clear that there's a correlation, if not a causation, which we're slowly getting more research to say there might be a cause and effect of less curiosity, self-control, and emotional stability. And those executive functionings are not developing the same way for like children who have a high amount of phone use or iPad or whatever use at ages 2 to 3. And if at age 4 they're having an excessive amount of the same type of media use, they are showing dysregulation, lower mathematics and literacy grades by age 8. And there are also some connections, we think, with ADHD. There's been high correlation with that. And just like numbing the brain's pleasure sensor so that it's less likely that doing other activities out and about are giving them the same amount of pleasure that they might have on the screen, or it takes a lot more intensity on the screen or in real life for them to have that same amount of pleasure. So that's important to know. So we're going to talk a little bit about social media. So social media, I bring this up first just because it is probably the top concern right now for parents and the top impact on negatively on our teenagers' mental well-being. So I'm hoping you're familiar with a lot of these platforms. So I can't possibly list them all, but the top ones that or your children are probably using are YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, not so much Facebook anymore, but Reddit, Discord, and a plethora of other ones. So you should just be aware of those. And if you want to know more about that, I'm going to give you a resource at the end of our time to show you how to really dig deep into how to understand each one of these platforms and how to educate yourself so you can help educate your children. But I want to go over how these really work. So this isn't by accident how your children might get addicted, and even us as adults, as parents, we might become addicted to some types of social media platforms. They were actually developed. This is research developed. They have researched how to have people become addicted to a social media platform so that they are totally engaged and spend more and more time on that platform, and then they can make more money. So I do want to say it's really important to think of yourself not as a consumer of these. You are a consumer, but they're not looking at you as the customer. So these platforms are not really looking at you as the customer for their product. They're looking at you as the product because they are selling your information, your children's information, what they tax, what they like, what they're looking at as data to other people to market more products to you and to your children. So please remember that as we go through that. But they've designed this, and this was actually published in a book that was written by Nir Eyal called Hooked: How to Build Habit Forming Products. And this is what was the basis for Instagram, so for the chat, Snapchat, and other platforms. But they make it so that there's either an external or internal trigger. So an example of this might be your pop-up notification. So if you have your phone and you have some applications that you've added and you have a pop-up notification that say, I just posted, let's do the example of your 13-year-old child who's getting ready for their algebra test tomorrow, and they put their phone down next to their computer as they get ready to study. And they have just posted a lovely picture of themselves and are hoping to get some reactions from friends on their Instagram account. And so they're starting to study, but then they hear a pop-up notification. So then they're distracted to go and look and see what has happened. And that leads to an action. So they either open the app or pick up their phone, whatever that is, and then they can get a reward. So we call it a variable reward because sometimes they're picking up their phone and checking their accounts to see, oh, someone has liked my post, or dang, no one's even said anything to my post. So sometimes they get the reward they're looking for, and sometimes they don't. And that's actually intentional. If they always got the reward they were looking for, it would make it less enticing. It makes them actually dig less deeply into that social media platform. But when sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, they're going to invest more time in that. So that variable word might be seeing a like or a chat or a mention, or it may not be. And so then they're making that choice to invest more time. So maybe they got that like and they're responding back or responding to other friends' posts, or they didn't get a like or a post on their thing. So they start scrolling to see, what is my best friend posted tonight and why did they get a post or a like or mention and I didn't? And so it continues the cycle of a trigger action, variable reward, and investment. And the problem with that is the social media platforms have not built in anything to restrict like a stopping point that says, okay, you've spent enough time. It's made so that they invest more and more time and stay in the app so that they can have more data and also more advertising. So it's important to look at that and understand that this is built as basically an uncontrolled experiment. So if you think of lab rats who are trained to get a reward by performing a task, and we can study that, it's a controlled experiment, but really our kids are these experiments that has no control. There was never an intention to have a control to see what happened or have a stopping point. They are enticed to engage and to never stop. And so this is where the spiral, if they do not have assistance or help or support in learning how to have control over that, then they will not be able to have that, help self-control if they don't already have that self-control. And this is what can lead to the more anxiety, depression, and isolation. So it is a really dangerous business. They are engaging in this practice purposefully to cause addiction. They are using exploitative data practices. They do have algorithmic rabbit holes to keep you going and spiraling down into the scrolling abyss. And they have addictive designs that are rooted in these dark patterns. So it really is a profiteering exploitation of us and our children. So you have to really put it in that context. Yes, there's positives that you can get out of using social media apps, but it's not really positive if it controls your life and it becomes a bad thing because it's too much interference with your life. So if you think of your life as in your children's life, as you have to spend so much time sleeping, you have to spend so much time at school or at work, and then you have to spend so much time in survival skills, and that takes up the majority of your day. So survivor skills being eating, right? Making sure you survive, getting your water and stuff. There's just a very small part of time that each of us has that is really for our growth and betterment. And so over time, if you look at habits of life since that 2010 time range, that time that was about this big that you had your day to choose what you wanted to do and really live your life in ways that engage with other people has reduced to about this much really creative time and about that much social media use. And it's for adults and teens alike. So that's really important to remember and to think about what you're giving up. So for teenagers, social media use, we really honestly in surveys cannot quite quantify how much time they're spending on it because now they are saying that they're spending all their time on constantly on social media, especially if they're allowed to have their phone at school. They're constantly pulling it out and just checking. It's just on all the time. There's hardly a time that they don't check what's going on their social media apps. And so for total screen time right now, approximately average is 8 hours and 39 minutes. For that's 43% of their waking time. For tweens, it's about 5 hours and 33 minutes. So that's a good portion of their life that they're spending online. So this is a breakdown of the most recent research that I can find about where that time's being spent. So just being aware of where that's going. So let's talk about distraction with social media. I don't know about you. So I recently got rid of my last social media app. So I'm down to hardly anything. I do have like one app that I have used for communication for a church group I'm in, and that's still quite annoying. I have to mute that all week long, and then I catch up on the weekend. But even with that, some shopping sites that I've been on where I had it still messages me multiple times a day about the 20% off, the 50% off. So even without social media apps, I'm getting messages all day long. But if you think about your kids and they have, Snapchat and they have Instagram and then they have this or that or the other, they're starting to get messages all day long. So approximately the average is about 154 notifications a day. That's about 3 to 4 per hour. But if you have a child or you yourself are a heavy social media user, it's about 1 per minute. And that can be really distracting. So you can start to see how this relates to kind of the ADHD, like impersonation, if not a causation, because when you are concentrated and really working deeply in thought and you're interrupted, it takes about 15 minutes to get back on track. So you can imagine if your child is getting a message per minute, they are completely distracted and unable to concentrate. So we really need to try to figure out how can we reduce that for our kids and make it so there's not so much distraction. And we're going to talk about that in just a second about schools and use. So there is an opportunity cost to this. So I'm going back to that socialization that kids really need to have to grow and be productive in life. So if they are not spending that time with their friends, being outside, talking to each other in the hallways, talking to each other at the lunchtime, getting together after school on the weekends, they're really giving that up for time on their phone. And that's just not a positive thing. So I'd like to emphasize too. So if you haven't seen, our governor in Ohio just recently put forward possible recommendation for legislation that would prohibit phone use in schools. And I know that can be a really controversial topic because a lot of parents want to have access to their children. They want to be able to contact them in the case of an emergency. But if you think about it and go back to all that constant notifications that they're getting, they're not able to concentrate in the school day if they're able to have their phone in class. But just thinking about what if they could put it away during class, but have it in between classes or at lunch. If you think about that time that they used to be spending conversing in the hallways or sitting together at lunch and talking, or even hanging out after school while they wait for the ride or wait for practice to start, that time's gone as they're pulling out their phone. So ideally, the only way to really reduce the negative impact of social media use, phone use, period, and incorporate more social time is to not have the phone accessible at all during the day. So although you may feel like you want to be in contact with your child, I feel like, and you could disagree with this, the chances of there being an emergency school is so low compared to the risk of them becoming anxious or depressed or isolated due to their social media use, that it's worth it for them not to have their phone and you not be on contact. The other safety issue is if there is an emergency at the school and your child is concerned with getting their phone out or filming something or contacting you and not getting to safety, it actually puts them at more risk. So I just want to put out there some things to think about as possible problems if we allow unfettered use of phones in school. The studies show very clearly that excessive media use leads to depression and anxiety. Any teen spending more than 3 hours a day on social media, it's a double the risk of experiencing mental health challenges, including depression, anxiety. And you saw that in a previous slide that it's more than 8 hours a day. So just think about that, how much their risk of depression, anxiety has increased with this increased social media use. So this is a study that's shown like from time spent on social media as it goes up. So it's really that 3 to 4 hour range where there's a significant increase in depression amongst boys and girls with social media use. One thing I really want to point out here is girls really are at much higher risk than boys for depression with social media use. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can't really go into tonight, but just know that girls do face a much higher risk of depression with increased social media use. Not only that, but suicide rates have really increased as well. And if you look at the timeline, you can see that it is around that 2010 with the advent of the iPhone and social media that has increased. So 167% increase since 2010 for girls and a 91% increase since 2010 for boys. So while this may not be a direct cause and effect, it's really hard to argue that social media use has not been the main culprit for this because there's no other event that's happened at that time that could possibly even come close to relating to that. If you look across the world, so research across different countries, not just the US, but other countries, this depression suicide rate has gone up all across the world at the same time at similar rates. So it definitely seems that it is this advent of the iPhone and increased media use that is causing that. So of course, addiction and dependency are concerned. So there's probably about 20% of older British teenagers are showing problematic smartphone use. It's about the same in the US as well. In addition, there's an increase in aggression and hallucinations in that age, that 13 to 7 with increased use, especially 13-year-olds are more notably affected. So that's important to keep an eye out on. And then there's a lack of sleep. So this goes to a really important tip that we're going to talk about later on that children really need not to have their phones in their room. That's the number one tip I would say to you. Do not allow phones into bedrooms, have them in a common area, have a common charging station so that those phones go there at night and they're not tempted to get it at night. Because there's a lot of things. The lighting on the phone, the blue light causes messes with the natural hormones that help you go to sleep. So the more that blue light they're getting, the more awake they are. And then when they have insomnia and they're waking up in the middle of the night and they're picking up their phone again, they're just restarting that. So it's important to have that out of the room and away. But that lack of sleep has a tremendous impact on other health concerns. And I've just listed some of those here. So obesity, diabetes, more injuries, poor mental health, and a paralysis of attention and behavior. So really, our kids are not getting the level of sleep that they really need to sleep well. So I have some hours there you can see, and you can also look that up. How many hours does my child need? So you can look at when are they going to bed, when they're waking up, and if they're not having their phone there and they're sleeping most of that time, you're probably okay. But if they're having that phone and on that at night, watching videos and conversing with friends for 2 or 3 hours instead of sleeping, that has a big impact on their sleep. So you can see with increased amount of time on their phone that how that negatively impacts their sleep as well. So the percentage of 9th and 12th graders who sleep 6 hours or less by percent of time hours on their phone. So like at 2 to 3 hours, you can see that the amount of time that they spend sleeping significantly decreases. So again, a lot of health concerns with an excessive amount of screen time. So the headaches, myopia, so that's nearsightedness by looking at that. Posture, spine issues from always leaning over, looking at the phone, and then of course sedentary behaviors that lead to obesity. So those are just a few of the health concerns, but of great concern. And when I go through this, I'd like you to really think about not just about your child possibly having being the victim of cyberbullying or some of these other topics we're going to talk about, but think of them as potentially ones instigating some of this behavior. And I know that's really hard to do, but there is two sides to the coin. So there are kids that are being bullied and there are kids that are doing the bullying, and you need to watch out for behaviors on either side of that and help talk to your child to prevent that behavior from being them instigating it or from being on the reciprocal end. But it's a significant issue, especially for young girls. As I said, like teenage young ladies are of particular impact with cyberbullying. So there's a lot of things I could say about what this means. Hopefully you kind of know what that is, but cyberbullying in a nutshell is sending, posting, sharing negative, harmful, false, or mean content about someone else. So anything like that could be a thing of cyberbullying, and sharing personal information about someone else that could cause embarrassment or humiliation. So sometimes friends betray other friends and share things that were shared in confidence. But it's really important to talk to your kids that some of that is actually criminal behavior, because we do have Ohio laws, which I'll show. This is just showing some additional other ways that kids can have cyberbullying. But really, anything can go into this box. It is really common. So at least of all teenagers that have been surveyed, 46% say they've experienced one type of cyberbullying. 28% say they have experienced multiple types, including harassment and hate speech. And then a lot of them who use social media say they have been body shamed. 61% have been exposed to sexist remarks, 58%, transphobic, 58%, racist, 55%, or homophobic, 53%. That's over half of our kids who are on social media have experienced this type of cyberbullying. And it's really important to note too, if you have a child who may have a disability, who may be overweight or part of the LGBTQ plus community, they are much more likely to be cyberbullied than any child who does not have those issues. And this is important to note because when surveyed, and this is a national survey that takes place every year over multiple decades that we've had this survey, the satisfaction with oneself that children have had has gone down significantly. And you can see it happens again at the 2010 mark, right, where the advent of social media. So it is important to note that the use of social media has negatively impact the self-image of our young ones. And the platforms that our kids can be cyberbullied on are anything really. I mean, mainly it's social media. Sometimes it's just messaging apps, instant messages. So those are some messaging apps that might not necessarily be the built-in SMS. Really less common is email, but those are all four things that you should be on the lookout for. It's really important to notice that this is a difficult problem to deal with because it's persistent. Children who have devices and are exposed to cyberbullying, they can be impacted 24 hours a day. It never goes away. So if you think of before social media, when kids were in school, they might have some bullying here and there in the hallways or on the playground. But now they can't get away from it because they have their phone and they can be bullied at any time. Another important thing to note is permanent. So any of that communication, so if my child were to cyberbully someone else, that's permanent information that could be shown against their behavior and their moral aptitude that never goes away. It's a footprint, a digital footprint that they'll live with forever, and that can come back to haunt them in important times in their life. But it's really hard to notice too. So kids can have that phone and be experiencing this and not talk about it with their parents or siblings or a teacher because it's taking place in private. It's important to know that and to talk to your children about this is forever. A digital footprint doesn't go away. So they might have a social media account where some of this happens and they delete it, but that social media account, that data could still be there, or other people have taken screenshots of that and shared it. It just doesn't go away. And when they go to apply for a job or apply for college and some of that comes up again, it could really negatively impact what they can do with their history, even if they've learned from that and made a change. So it's important to talk to them about this digital footprint that they have. And it can be against the law. So you could have a child who is intentionally harassing another child online, or it's the same in person, but they could actually go to jail for that. So it's important to know that this could be prosecuted with the law. So I'm not going to go through all these examples, but there are a ton of examples online of some really negative impacts that kids have had, teenagers have had with cyberbullying. And we're going to talk a little bit about some like sextortion, how the suicide rates involved with that are really impactful. But it's important to talk about some of these scenarios with your kids about things that could happen. So I can share that personally myself. As an administrator in school, I had a child make a fake social media account in the name of another student at the school who did not have the social media account, and then posted a very inappropriate picture of themselves and sent it out to a bunch of the young ladies in the class. So they may think that this is not like it's anonymous, they'll never get caught. But we actually were able to find who that student was because we filed a police report, and that police report helped Snapchat to get us the phone number that the account was made under. And then I actually had that phone number in my phone because it was a friend of my child's. It was very devastating, but it was also very difficult for that child because it's an illegal act and they had to face the consequences of that. So it's important to talk to your kids about what they should do if they receive any inappropriate type of text message or Snapchat, to take screenshots of that to save, to call it out and share that, and to definitely not do that themselves or respond in kind. So those are things to talk about. So how do you know if your child is experiencing cyberbullying or other types of harassment online? It can be really difficult at times, but these are some things you want to look out for. So, are they really having an increased use of their device, including texting, or are they hiding it like at times, like they suddenly going in a corner in the room and texting when you can't see? Are they avoiding going to places and events that they normally would have gone to before? Are they showing emotional responses to stuff they're seeing on the screen that might be appropriate or inappropriate or like exaggerated? Just that change in their outward expressions that might indicate that they're having problems. Are they changing their social media accounts? Did you friend them on a social media account to try to keep track and then it suddenly disappears only to find that they create a new one? That's a really high indicator that something might be going on. So, things you can do is help to notice those changes in mood or behavior and notice if it's changing centered around that device. And then you should really document anything that you do become aware of so that you can have that to help prevent that in the future. I cannot emphasize enough, and I'm going to say this a couple more times in our time tonight, that it's really important to establish a relationship with your child that's open and honest, where you can talk about what's happening. And especially that you have an open conversation that's forgiving. So your child knows that if they come to you to share consequences alone. So please, just whatever you do tonight, take away from this, take away that it's important to sit down with your child, no matter what age they are, about appropriate social media use and establish that relationship with them, that you're open for that discussion and talk. And just make sure you're reporting anything and supporting your kid or even their friends when they experience these problems. So I'm not going to talk a lot about pornography, but I do want to just emphasize that it's another thing to talk about your kids about. So I want to encourage you, as embarrassing as it is to talk to your children about sexual relations and pornography, that you take that step. And there are a lot of resources. If you go to Amazon and look at how to, books about talking about sex, there are a lot of great resources out there. I personally, my husband and I used a series of 4 books for different ages. So it really started at age 2 and talking about where did I come from, and then it had more about what are mommy and daddy's like, and then it talked more about relationships. And then as a teenager, had a book that really talked about sexual intercourse. And as difficult as that was to sit and talk with our kids about that, I'm so appreciative now that we did that, because they really felt like they could come and talk and ask questions. And we still ask those hard questions sometimes. Our kids are a little bit older. We have one still in the teenage years, and I'm pretty open and honest with them and ask them direct questions at times. And but I don't think I could have done that if we hadn't started that conversation really young. So look for those resources, but talk about the positivity of it. So sex isn't a bad thing; it's a good thing. It can be really great in a positive relationship where there's a commitment to each other, and it's supposed to bring you closer. So talking about that positive aspect of it, and talking about how that can be challenging or difficult if you don't have a long-term view of that, having that physical relationship is important to talk about. So I just want to emphasize that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about deep fakes. So if you haven't heard about this, there are a lot, and this is why I caution teenagers, be careful what you put on your social media, because anyone can get on a social media, especially if you have it public. So if a lot of our kids have public, Instagrams, anyone can go and record that video, take it and feed it into an AI generator, and then have a deep fake video made with their likeness and image that is inappropriate. So there's no avoiding that if you post things publicly. Anyone can take your voice, anyone can take your face, anyone can take your body, anything that's posted on there, and use that in these deep fakes. So you have to think about, are you okay with that if you put things out publicly? And of course, there are people that you might know who may surprisingly do things that are inappropriate anyway. So just being very conscientious of what you do and what you post and make public. If you're not familiar with this, one of the things that AI can do right now, there are some apps out there. This hasn't quite been totally regulated as of yet, but there's things called notify apps. So this has been especially problematic for some young teenage boys getting these apps and then taking a photo of a classmate off of their, whatever social media account, and then all they have to do is open up the app, give it the photo, and it takes the clothes off the person. And then they send it to their friends. And sometimes they think that's just, it's innocent. It's not really the person. It's just a fake image of that person using a photo they posted. But it can actually be considered harassment, bullying, and also pornography that they could be prosecuted for. So it's important to know that these apps are out there and talk to your kids about not utilizing those, and being careful about that. And there's just there's advertisements for this all over social media. So it's not like you can hide it or avoid it. It's just out there and they can access this at any time. So having that conversation with them about this is important to let them know not to utilize those. So children can interact with these types of deepfakes anywhere that they have social media access or media access. So gaming and virtual worlds, online challenges, pranks, it's just everywhere. So it's important to talk about these, how they could become victims and how they should not make victims of anyone else. So I'm going to keep moving along with this. I want to spend a little bit of time on this. We're getting close to the end, and I'm going to give you some really hands-on tips about how to address and work with your kids more practical ways. But this is a really disturbing for me, how I thought this would probably go away, since I used to do these talks like 10 years ago, and I'm still kind of doing them. But I thought this would go away a little bit with more information and education, but honestly, it's not getting a whole lot better. But sextortion is when someone is threatened to be exposed if they do not send nudes, or if they do send nudes and then they're extorted for money. And this is just as common as it used to be. And there's actually you could think of overseas gangs that this is their business that to do this. So they actually research and find young teens on social media. They research them, find their friends at their schools, their churches, neighbors, and have a lot of content and data ready on that person. And then they make a fake account to reach out to them and extort. So a young man might have a young girl. Sorry, I go back to this and I'll come back to that. So a fake girl may text a young man and entice him to send a nude. And then that's when the sextortion starts to happen. And these groups have 4 or 5 people that are constantly bombarding the person with texts and emails, threatening them. And so they can't really escape. And this can be not just even on the regular social media that you may be aware of, but there's social media apps that you may not be aware of that your kid can have that is totally anonymous. So they can meet people where nobody has to put any information on, that are made specifically. It's like a predator's play world. So just be aware that there's other apps out there that can do that. So this slide is depicting, you can see some of the pictures or images are repeated, but each one of these young men depicted here are young men that committed suicide after being sextorted. So it's important to know, like Jordan DeMay, we're going to talk a little bit about in the next slide. He was 17. He was enticed into sextortion and killed himself within less than 6 hours. James Woods, 17, 19 hours. Brandon Marcus was 15, committed suicide within 30 minutes. And then Gavin Guffey was 17. I don't have a lot of data on him, but I mean, there's several here that I don't talk about. So this is where I'm very concerned. I talked a little bit before about looking for the signs for cyberbullying. And there are signs when kids are being cyberbullied or they are cyberbullying someone else, but it is not really possible to always see the signs of sextortion because of this fact that it's happening in a way that is so overwhelming to young teens. And as you can see, it's mostly young men that they're so overwhelmed in such a short time, they can't escape. They don't have time to go to someone for help. They haven't talked about an escape plan with their parents if this were to happen. And you may not have time to intervene before they make a very devastating decision in their life. So it is critical not to wait to have these conversations with your kids about social media use and the possibility of sextortion until it happens. You have to preemptively assist them to understand what could happen and open that talking gateway, have an escape plan that you have with them that they can come to you immediately if they get themselves in trouble, and that they do not have to be ashamed to come to you and say, I sent something inappropriate and I'm getting harassed now and I need your help. They need to know they can do that. And you need to be forgiving if that does happen so you can prevent a worse consequence and outcome. So Jordan, this is surprising to me. Like you would think someone like this would not feel so devastated with making this mistake that he would end his life, but he was homecoming king, sorry. And it was just a Nigerian extortion ring. There's about 4 of them that sent him a um, fake social media account in the name of Danny Roberts and asking for exchange of nudes. And when he sent something, he then went, sent that, and then the extortion began. And it's important to note, like if you see in 2024, this was last year, just up through October 5th, there was more than 456,000 reports of online enticement. So those are ones that got reported. And a lot of people don't report this. So I'm guessing it's probably double to triple that number of online enticements that have happened. So this is not just a random, non-common thing. It's common and it does happen. So you need to talk to your kids about the possibility of it. And it's important to talk about to them that they actually may be too young to have a TikTok account, which is 13. Like 13 is a legal age. They're not supposed to legally have a social media account before age 13. And if they do, it's illegal. And but they could be old enough to go to jail for sending inappropriate pictures, especially across state lines. So it's important to talk to them about that. And it's important to know not to reshare any photos that you might receive or become aware of or have screenshots of, because then you could also be prosecuted for pornography if you reshare those. So don't ask for someone to send you photos that they received. You need to come together and then also get the police involved. So that's important to know too. So what can you do about all this? I've given you a lot of very negative information, I know, and it can be overwhelming, but there are things you can do. So the 3 things I say, do these 3 things, and we can't give you all the guidance tonight, but you need to educate yourself first and foremost. Get yourself educated, and I'm going to give you some resources for that, and then also educate your child. You need to monitor their use and also monitor your own use. And then you provide support to your children so that they feel comfortable reporting any concerns. So for educate, there's a lot of resources online. I'm going to give you a couple. So this one site, commonsensemedia.org, I highly recommend that you go to this site and you go to the parent guides, because if you're not familiar with Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, Roblox, any of these things, they actually have training for you so you can understand what the platform is capable of, what it does, and how to do the parental controls. And then it has a lot of other ages and stages, like how to work with your children. There's activities on here to utilize, like discussion activities, other physical game kind of activities to do with your child to talk about appropriate use of social media and media in general. So I highly recommend this as a one-stop shop to really get a lot of information to educate yourself and also some resources to help you.
Kind of asking Leo all the
What?
questions that just kind of
I
asking
don't know
Leo.
if you could hear that. Sorry, I have a video that started playing that's not on that screen.
Just kind of asking Leo all the questions
Let me turn that
that
off.
you might ask.
Okay, hopefully you can't hear that now. There's also better screen time. So this actually has some online courses you can purchase and utilize that goes really in depth. These are a little pricey, but they might be helpful for you if you really feel like you need some extra help. Or I recommend going in with some friends to purchase the course and then do this all together as a parenting group. Then there's also something called, and I don't have Good Inside. So Good Inside has not just stuff on social media, but everything about parenting. So there's a lot of different parenting modules on here for you to utilize. So the next thing, and this is what's really hard. I used to give some really concrete how to set up your router to monitor your child's use. It has gotten really impossible to monitor your children's use of media like it used to be. But there are some things you can do. So on iPhones and Androids, there are specific ways to do like screen time. So the iPhone has something called screen time, where you can actually set the privacy restrictions. You can limit what content they can have, and you can limit the time frame. So times of the day, amount of time. So you can actually set, okay, for Instagram, you can only spend 20 minutes a day. You can set the timer on that. Similar for Android. So that Common Sense Media actually has some step-by-steps, but you can also Google step-by-steps to set up iPhone for parental controls. So I recommend looking online to get those step-by-step instructions because we can't really step you through all of those here. There are ways to actually set up your internet and Wi-Fi controls. So you can get routers that have filtering. So this is only going to be at the home though. So if you don't set it up on the device itself, then when they're not at home, then they're not going to have these parental controls. But you can set up your router to block specific websites or have filters, set bedtimes. You can also view all of their usage that comes through on that router. So you can, log into the admin side of it and look at what's been utilized. There's also third-party tools that you can use, like that Circle Home Plus, OpenDNS, or Griffin, that you can add to your router that does a little bit more robust monitoring. On the device itself, or like the apps that they use, there are controls within those apps, as long as your child doesn't know how to turn those controls off, or you turn on the parental controls so that they can't make alterations. And then there are applications you can install on the phone that help to monitor. So the number one probably is Bark. Custodio, we used to use that. I haven't heard of a lot of people using that lately. Bark is definitely the top one that people have used as of late. So you can just look up Bark on Google, and I recommend that. But there's other ones as well. So a question I get asked a lot is when to give your child a phone. So my answer might be different than what you would feel, but this is what is in research right now, when to give a phone. They say not to give a phone before like the end of middle school. So they should not have a phone that they utilize until they get to high school. That's really tough to do, I know. But there are other things you could do. You can give them a basic phone in middle school so they don't have the internet and social media access, and then move to the smartphone in high school, and still have the parental oversight then. And then social media. So this was talking about before, the illegality of having a social media app before age 14. So there's the legal term is Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. So all those social media apps, they are not allowed to have children under the age 13 have an account. But there is no way right now that they have set up to verify ages. Now, there are lots of ways to actually incorporate that. I'm not going to go into the the details of that, but there are some ways that it's going to take a major legal push to get it through for these social media platforms to have this means of checking for ages. And it's kind of complicated, but there is a way to do it. But it's not going to happen unless people advocate for that. So right now it's illegal to have social media accounts prior to 13 years of age. So you can use that as an excuse for your child. No, you cannot have that because it's illegal. But there is a push now for us to go to the age of 16, which is what most researchers say is the appropriate age for social media use to avoid that increase in depression and anxiety. So Australia has already moved to this. It'll go into effect later this year. And the US does have legislation getting ready to start to go through for that. So I would use that as a guide. But I can't emphasize enough about how important it is to keep that phone out of the sleeping area at night, have a common space. And what helps is if the parents actually have that common space too. So if you could always use your phone in the common space, not take it in the bedroom and set the example, and it goes a long way. And then finally, giving your child a lot of support. So having discussions with them, having those hard conversations about what appropriate media use is, what the dangers are. Start the conversation young so you can continue to have that conversation at each stage of their life. And model the right behavior. These are things we've kind of already talked about. Take digital breaks together, like have a day a week where none of you use social media. That would be a great way to also get them in the habit of understanding what's it like to take a break. A lot of families take breaks, like they take a vacation. They say we're going to have no phone use, except for emergency phone calls. And that goes, some kids really end up at the end of the week saying they love that week. And also, finally, this is my last thing, and then we can talk more specifically and answer some questions. Advocacy is a big deal. So getting together to advocate for changes in legislations and laws. So as this bill comes through with the Ohio legislature for banning phones in school, I would encourage you to talk to other parents about why that's important that students have time in the day that they can be free from that distraction and advocate for that, or other solutions that are here. I also want to point out that this is tough. As parents, it's so tough to have this conversation, to monitor your kids, to be engaged in a way that's constant. It's like a constant stress, I think, on life as you work with your children on this. But it's especially difficult when you're a single parent. So I just want to acknowledge that you need to, if you have a partner, that's great. You need to support each other and get on the same page. If you don't have a partner, it is doubly difficult. So teaming up with another family, another parent, really having parents band together like early 5th grade or so before they go to middle school and say, hey, let's get as many parents as we can to sign a pact that we're not going to have phones, like the social media use until grade 8. Let's just do that. And there's actually an organization for that. It's like not until 8th. I think it's wait till 8th. And so the number is 10. So if you can get 10 families to band together to make that pact together, then the kid does not feel isolated when they're the one without a phone. Because if there's 10 or more, they feel like it's not an isolation thing. So that's another thing to do. So hopefully those are some practical things you can do. Also finding ways to give them the step ladder of going from childhood to adulthood. Here's a step of things that you can do with them to give them something to look forward to, but also set appropriate boundaries.
All right, to kind of bring this full circle, you have a child that you're talking to about social media. And how do you approach this? Well, it turns out that if you want to have the most impact, scare tactics don't work too well for many things. And I think that's probably going to be true with social media too. So with drug and alcohol abuse and talking to kids about alcohol, drugs, and smoking, it turns out that practicing role-playing and practicing peer pressure refusal skills is much more effective than scare tactics. So I like to talk to parents about this and propose to parents they talk to their kids about this in terms of social media too. The concept is that you prepare kids through role playing how to respond to a request to partake in social media, such as, hey, text me a picture of yourself naked, that kind of thing. And you start early, and as silly as it might be, this is what you would do. You would say, okay, well, what if someone sends you a message on your phone and asks you to do something, or send them a picture that you don't agree with? What would you do? And the level one would be just say no. And then if they continue to push your child to do that, what do you do next? And use their own words like, I'm not into that, or I don't want to get grounded, or I don't want to get in trouble, or school's important to me, I'm afraid I would get kicked out of school. And then level three would be if the pressure continues, just to leave the situation. And you come up with a rescue plan. You have a plan with your child that you discuss prospectively about how to respond. For example, you might tell them, hey, I just remembered I was supposed to check in with my mom about something, and you call them, and then they have a code word, for example, where you know you're going to come pick them up. You tell them that there's a family emergency, I have to come pick you up, and I'll be right there. And then lastly, and very important, is you express your child, this will not be a situation where you're going to get in trouble, you're going to be judged, I'm going to get angry, that I'm just going to be really pleased with you for acting in this mature way and this smart way in this situation. So try this with your kids. The more you practice, the more they get comfortable, the more they learn to use their own words with their own voice, and in response to things where there's temptation or pressure to do something they don't want to do, the more successful they'll be.
Those are great suggestions, and here are some other ones that I think I've heard that are really good ones that you can also use. Like, so of course, just the say no. Sometimes kids can just suggest an alternative activity. They can use humor. Just pretend they didn't hear it, ignore it. Pass the blame to the parent. Like, my parents would never let me see you again, and I really wanted to be your friend, so I don't want to take the chance of not being your friend anymore, so let's do something else. So just a few extra things that they can do there. And in that role play, I would recommend maybe taking some very specific types of things you can utilize, like statements that you can practice. So here's just a few that you can take and try with your kids. So here's an example. A friend makes fun of a classmate's social media post. They leave a comment and ask you to comment too. So you work through that with your child. What would you do in that situation as your friend's asking you to make a rude comment on another friend's post? What do they say or do? So you can probably come up with a lot of these scenarios, but doing that practice together will really help to get them ready to prevent the situation from happening that they regret later on. Okay, so that's going to conclude our webinar tonight. Thanks so much for joining us, and watch your email for more information and links to those resources that I shared earlier tonight. Thanks.